thank you so much for the invitation to come here. And I'm sure we will learn a lot during these days, and we hope that we can contribute with some new perspectives also for you. We will speak about the biological cultural heritage of avenues and roadside trees. So, biological cultural heritage, in short, is living organisms that can tell us about human history. Just like other types of heritage, like old houses, castles, burial sites, etc., although these are living organisms. The definition by the Swedish Heritage Board says that biological cultural heritage are ecosystems, habitats, and species which have originated, developed, or been favored by human utilization of the landscape. So it could be entire landscapes, it could be individual trees, or it could be species living on the trees. For example, avenues and other roadside trees contribute to our biological cultural heritage in several ways. Firstly, the design and location of the avenues reflects something about the past, the ideas, the manifestation of power, etc. Aesthetics, which we will not speak about today. Another aspect is that the trees preserve traces, just like we just heard of former pruning, for example. And here we can say an old pruning at this level, and then after some time, the branches developed and they have been pruned again at a new level. We also have pollarding made for not aesthetic purposes, but as we also heard, for example, leaf, for taking leaf as animal fodder. And this is trees just next to an old village in South Sweden. And also here we can see that they have been cut at one level first, and then this one at a second level. And there is much more, we think, to learn about how to interpret the shapes of trees and what they say about human history. Leaf fodder was a very important source of fodder for the animals until perhaps the interwar period. And the landscape in Sweden and probably many other countries were full of pollarded trees along roads, but also in the landscape. The third aspect, which we will dig deeper into, is the biodiversity connected to the trees. And this is an oak, Quercus robur, the only oak we have in Sweden, which is has so many species connected to it. I cannot count them all. And these species, except from being just rich biodiversity, they also have something to tell us about our history.
Okay, I will say a little more about that. As you know, old trees can be very rich in species of, for example, beetles, lichens, mosses, mushrooms, fungi. And those species, they live on various parts of the tree. For example, in hollows, as Piotr said, being hollow is a natural condition of a tree, especially in this second and third life of a tree. They live on the bark, they live on dead wood, they live on thick branches, etc. And yeah, in fact, a tree can be seen as an ecosystem in itself. For example, an oak in Sweden can harbor around 500 different species of organisms, of insects and cryptogams, which is more than many other types of nature, actually. Much of this biodiversity is really connected to this second and third stages of life of trees. That is when the trees get old. And especially in northern climates, like in Sweden, the trees should also be sun exposed to get the proper temperature for the insects, for example. Now, these species, of course, they come from somewhere to the trees in avenues, and they especially come from the surrounding landscape and especially human-made habitats in the surrounding landscapes where you can find these sun-exposed trees. For example, here a forest pasture to the upper left. You have of deciduous trees in this case with old pines. It could be wooded pastures. There you are. Wooded pasture with deciduous trees. It could be a wooded hay meadow where we have these trees and shrubs pruned for leaf fodder, as Anna showed. And pollard trees can also be found in pastures. Now, in most of Europe, these ecosystems have vanished and decreased a lot. But if we, for example, know that which species used to be in a wooded hay meadow, and we find these species on roadside trees, well, then the species constitute a heritage. It can be interpreted to tell that it used to be a wooded meadow next to the avenue. You following me? Oh, sorry, the pointer again. It's too much technicalities for me. Yeah, you can understand that if we find species from a wooded meadow on a tree like this, it indicates that there used to be a wooded meadow in the past. That's the heritage part of it. I will show you two examples, well, three examples actually. Here is a part of Uppland, the province of Uppland in Sweden. You have a castle here with an avenue, and you have a lot of pastures where you can see scattered trees. This is an aerial photograph from 1960. So in this landscape, there were old sun-exposed trees on a lot of places, in pastures and in the park and in the avenues. And you can easily imagine that species could easily move between these patches. It was an ecological communication between the avenues and the landscape. Today, if we make an inventory of valuable trees, you see that there are virtually only the park and the avenues that still have those trees, because the rest of the landscape has been overgrown and been too shady, or the trees have been cut. So here the trees and the beetles and everything that you found on the trees, they sort of indicate what has been in the past in the surrounding landscape. Here's another example. This is a nice map from 1790 of another part of Uppland, Fånö. And in the map description, you can see that there were some avenues already at that time. They also tell what kind of trees there were in the allée. It also indicates the surrounding landscape. For example, down here, there is a patch of forest with many kinds of trees. So it's easy to understand that once this avenue developed old trees, it was a lot of opportunities for it being colonized from the landscape. And indeed it is. In this avenue it's found 125 species of beetles on oaks, for example. Today you can see that there are still a lot of trees in the landscape. So this is a rather rich landscape, but you can also see that the avenue actually constitutes about half of all the trees in the landscape. So without the avenue, this tree would be rather poor in biodiversity. Okay, I will have a final example here. This is a small island in the Lake Mälaren of central Sweden, where the red dots indicate valuable trees. And there is a particular beetle here, the hermit beetle, which occurs in all of Western Europe. Also in France you have it, but it's rare everywhere. And I think it's subject to several protection programs in Europe. It demands old trees, and on this island it's found in 5 trees. It's 2 oaks here, and it's 3 trees in an old avenue. And what does this indicate? Well, these big oaks, they are much older than the rest of the trees on the island. So the red dots, they are valuable, but they are not as old as these two. And actually these two oaks, they are remnant from an old landscape 200, 250 years ago, when Sweden was very rich in big trees, especially oaks. And that we know because the Swedish Navy surveyed the landscape for trees useful for shipbuilding. So for example, in the year 1795 in the province of Uppland, almost 7,500 valuable trees were found. And of course there were also many more that was not valuable for the Navy. And most of these trees were cut. So you see that in 1825 only 146 remained. And it's the same pattern in all of Sweden. It went from 229,000 trees in 1795 to 40,000 in 1825. Many of these trees probably contain this rare species, rare beetle. And so if we go back, there we are, we can say that the occurrence of this beetle indicates the status of a landscape 250 years ago or something like that.
So we will summarize with a few perspectives. Firstly, if we look back to the past, the 18th century in this case, we know for sure that the landscape was full of sun-exposed old trees, valuable for biodiversity, while the parks and the avenues were still quite recent and not so old, probably not so biodiversity rich either. But today, most valuable trees out in the landscape have vanished. They have been cut down or they have died from shading in forest. But on the other hand, these road trees and parks are really valuable now because they are old and they have been capturing sort of the species from the surrounding landscape. And so we have tried to show here that the biodiversity of these trees, they link the present to the past in a very nice way. We understand more about our history. But also these trees, as we see it, they bring nature into the city. So they connect the city to the countryside because we have nature brought in there, which not the least is important for the connection between humans and nature. So humans get more into contact with nature via the trees. And interestingly, many of the characteristics that are making these avenues species rich are also appealing to humans. For example, the old trunks, the hollow trees, the sunny landscapes, we all appreciate those. And also that there are many trees in the same place. It creates an environment for insects and other species, and they are also in such a close distance that they are connected. So these are all features that we like and that the biodiversity is benefiting from. And altogether, we as humans experience this as beautiful and exciting. But the connection between humans and trees have a very long history, as we also were presented from Piotr. Long before there were road trees, people were in close contact with nature. And except from the case of the tree Yggdrasil, which constitutes the whole universe in the Nordic cosmology, we also have the case of the first humans, Ask and Embla, who were actually created from two trees. So there was this story about the three brothers who were gods and found these tree trunks on the shore, and they breathed life into these trunks and created humans from these trees. Finally, we also want to highlight that from our perspective, avenues and trees in general are not just architectural monuments, they are not only aesthetic, but they are very much alive. And as an example here, we have a high lane, a big road cutting through an old alley, leading to a big estate up on the other side. But it has been indicated here by these monuments of metal to indicate that there were trees here, because you cannot really see them so clearly from the road. So they want to highlight that this is an important place for trees. I don't know the history behind it, but this is of course dead, but these are living. So as a summary, trees and the species in avenues are legacies from the past. They tell us about past landscapes, and they tell us about us humans. For example, where in the landscape there have been trees of different ecological quality, where there were large trees, hollow trees, sun-exposed trees, and also the amount of sun-exposed old trees in the landscape. Were there many, were there few? And they also often indicate openness, also, of course, aesthetic ideals, as we will hear more about later. And finally, how people have more practically used them to collect leaf, cutting wood, basket material, shade, and other types of use. So that is our final picture.